Welcome. I know you didn't get here by accident. Maybe sleep was being stubborn, or maybe you're just looking for a voice to keep you company. No worries, you're in the right place. Let the sound of rain calm your breath. Breathe slowly, and give your mind a chance to drift away from everything for a bit, and to dive deeper into the experience. Put on your headphones and turn off the lights. The story is about to begin. Once upon a time, there was a man named John Randolph who was wandering through a remote forest in Colorado. When he started to smell a bad odor, his curiosity got the better of him, so he decided to follow it. It led him to an empty clearing. In that clearing, John saw what looked like an old campsite. John was far away from any kind of civilization, so the idea that someone had been camping here, apparently a long-term settler, seemed really strange to him. So John stepped onto the empty land to see what was going on. When he turned around in the middle of the campsite, he saw something he couldn't even process at first. It was so terrifying that it seemed unreal, but he finally realized what he was looking at was totally real. Then John spun around and ran away from the place, scared out of his mind, shouting for help. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the story. On a freezing cold night in February 1874, a 60-year-old man named Israel Swan was sitting around a fire with a group of men in a valley west of Colorado were gathered around a fire, including Israel, one of the gold prospectors. They were roaming the western United States looking for gold. But over the past few weeks, this group had been trapped in this valley because of terrible winter storms. The storms kept coming, each dumping up to 6 feet of snow. But on this particular night, while Israel was sitting by the fire enjoying the warmth of the flames and listening to the stories the others were telling, one of his friends, another prospector named Alfred Packer, stood up and started urging. The whole group was getting ready to leave the valley. Alfred told the group that the weather was starting to get a bit better and the snow was beginning to melt. He said he knew a way out of the valley that would only take 2 weeks and would lead them straight to Breen Ridge in Colorado, a spot famous among gold miners for having a lot of gold. Alfred was trying to convince them it was a great idea. They could get out of there early and get rich at the same time. When Alfred finished talking, he sat down again, and everyone stayed quiet for a moment. Israel looked around to see if anyone would accept Alfred's offer. It was Israel. He knew that most other gold collectors, unlike him, didn't like Alfred. They said he was lazy and hard to deal with. But Israel felt the real reason they hated his friend wasn't that. He believed it was because Alfred had epilepsy, which meant he had regular seizures. Since he had those seizures, it made him a burden on trips like these, where everyone needed to rely on each other and everyone had to pull their weight. So, they were worried about having someone who could become useless at any moment because of a seizure. But for Israel, Alfred's epilepsy wasn't a big deal. He didn't see him as a burden, on the contrary. Alfred was thought to be smart and bold, so when he stood up and gave his speech, Israel felt it really fit his personality. He's the kind of guy who likes to get things done, and that's what Israel liked about him. But just because Israel admired Alfred didn't mean he was automatically going to join him in his big plan. He was still thinking it over. As Israel weighed the pros and cons of teaming up with Alfred, he glanced over at the fire and saw a huge, serious-looking man slowly shaking his head side to side like he was saying, "No, you can't be thinking about leaving early." Then the big man stood up and held out his hand toward Alfred, as if telling him, "Don't say a word." In other words, he said as he looked at him, "If you betray us now, you and all your friends will die." Then the big man sat down again, and everyone stayed around the fire in tense silence for a few seconds. You might be wondering who this big man was. The big man who just spoke wasn't a gold prospector. He was completely different from the others sitting around the fire. His name was Uri, and he was the leader of the Ute tribe, a group of tribes located in Utah and Colorado in the southwestern United States. The state of Utah was actually named after the Ute tribe. Yuri had saved the lives of everyone around the fire, including Israel. A few weeks ago, Al-Farid lost his group of gold collectors in this valley, the same valley where the leader Yuri lived with his tribe. They found them struggling, almost dying because of the heavy snow. Yuri and his tribe gave them food and water and helped them set up camp near the river. Then, leader Yuri told them to stay in that camp until winter was over. When the snow melted in spring, it would be safe to leave the valley. At first, the gold collectors were just grateful and really happy that leader Yuri had found them and set up the camp. It was great, so they didn't mind waiting until spring. They were about to leave the valley, but after several weeks stuck in that camp, the whole group started feeling restless and anxious. They were scared that if they didn't leave soon, they'd run out of gold to dig up. As for Israel specifically, the pressure was even greater. He had told his family this would be his last treasure hunt, so he couldn't go home empty-handed. He desperately needed the gold to support his family. So when Alfred stood up and broke the silence, saying, "Thanks, Chief Yuri, for your concern, but I'm leaving early and I hope the others follow me," Israel saw the determination in Farid's eyes and felt he really needed to leave now. He needed to find that gold. So Israel said, "All right, I'll go with you too." After Israel agreed, 4 more gold collectors volunteered to leave early with Farid. Leader Yuri realized he couldn't change any of their minds. Even though he thought it was a bad idea, he shifted his focus from trying to stop them to giving them as much info as possible about the area they were heading into. So he gathered all the volunteers leaving early, drew a map in the dirt, and spoke to Farid, Israel, and the 4 others. "You guys need to follow the river to get out of here. It'll take you to the San Juan mountain range. Don't try to cross those mountains. Stick to the river's path and go around the mountain range. After that, you'll find a forward camp where you can stop to rest and resupply before heading to Bryn Ridge." Then, Chief Yuri marked an X on the dirt map to pinpoint the camp's exact location. After that, he turned around, got on his horse, and rode off. Shortly after, Alfred, Israel, and the other gold prospectors went to bed. The next morning, Israel, Alfred, and the other 4 woke up early and started packing their gear. Meanwhile, someone stepped forward. The gold prospector, who didn't volunteer to join them and decided to stay in the valley until spring, offered to help carry supplies as much as he could. He used his horse, but planned to stop at a certain point and let them continue on their own. The men thanked him for the help. After breakfast, they set off. As Israel and the others walked out of the valley, they started to see the towering, rugged peaks of the San Juan Mountains in the distance. But they made sure to veer north to stay close to the river path, just like their leader Yuri had advised, not to try crossing those mountains. Israel was carrying a metal coffee pot filled with glowing embers, not just to keep his hands warm, but also to use the embers to start a fire if the matches ran out. That was an old trick he had learned. While holding that warm pot in the freezing cold, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Alfred, who looked much worse off than him. Without hesitation, Israel handed the warm coffee pot to Alfred, who took it gratefully and held it close to his hands. None of these gold prospectors had struck it rich. They were all nearly broke. But among them all, Alfred was the poorest by far. That's why Israel felt a strong urge to protect him, especially since Alfred was half his age, just 30. While Israel was 60. Israel used to see him as a lost kid trying to find his way. Alfred had told Israel that when the American Civil War broke out, he tried to join the Union Army twice because he wanted to fight against the Confederate Army, which supported slavery. But both times he was rejected because he had epilepsy. Still, that didn't stop him from tattooing his unit's info and name on his arm after being turned down by the army. Alfred drifted from one job to another without settling down or starting a family. Once again, Israel felt this guy needed help. When Alfred happily took the warm coffee cup from Israel, he returned the favor by pulling a bottle out of his jacket pocket. He handed the alcohol over to Israel like he was saying, "Thanks for this coffee pot." Then the two friends walked side by side for a while, taking turns drinking the alcohol and passing the coffee pot. Late in the afternoon, the snow started falling again. The prospector, who had volunteered to use his horse to carry some supplies to a spot, arrived and said, "My horse can't go any further. The weather's really bad. Sorry guys, I have to turn back." So he left the supplies and headed back, probably retracing his steps. As the men watched him disappear down the trail, the same thought crossed all their minds. "I just have to tough it out for 2 weeks on this dangerous journey, and I'll make it to Breen Ridge and swim." Alfred, Israel, and the other 4 explorers never made it to the front position that their leader Yuri had set behind the San Juan Mountains, which was supposed to be their first stop before heading to Breen Ridge. 2 more weeks passed, and they still hadn't arrived there, with no sign of them at any of the nearby camps. Alfred's plan to leave depended on stable weather. It's true the weather was better when they set out, but just a few days into their journey, the winter storms came back hard, dumping heavy snow on the valley and the path they took. No one knew about this adventure. The dangerous group was basically just themselves, along with the leader Yuri and the other loyal followers who decided to stay in the valley until spring. But even if they knew Alfred, Israel, and the others were in trouble, there was no way they could help or even get in touch with the outside world. They were completely stuck in the valley, powerless to do anything. In short, after Alfred, Israel, and the other 4 men got lost in the wilderness, everything changed on the morning of April 16, 1874, about 2 months after their trip started, which was supposed to last only 2 weeks. On that morning, a group of officials were... The guy in the front was having breakfast in one of the wooden cabins when suddenly the door slammed open. They all turned to see a man with messy hair and a scruffy beard, looking like a skeleton, standing at the entrance. He had a rifle in one hand and a metal coffee pot in the other. His eyes were darting wildly from side to side, and he looked clearly shocked. He tried to speak, but couldn't. This man was Alfred. The people in charge immediately realized he needed urgent help, so they quickly brought him inside, shut the door, and gave him food and water. Alfred started eating ravenously until he got sick, then apologized, saying, "I was just wandering back and forth." He was out in the wilderness for weeks, and it must have really messed up his insides. But the officials didn't care about the vomiting. They were more worried he might die right in front of them. They helped him clean up and put on warm clothes, then asked for some whiskey to warm him up. After a few sips, he started to relax. One of the officials asked, "What happened to you, man?" As soon as he heard the question, he closed his eyes and frowned. Just thinking about it was really painful. After a moment of silence, he told them, still with his eyes closed, that he'd been with 5 other guys trying to get out of the valley to reach Breen Ridge in Colorado. They were out looking for gold, but while they were on the trail, a huge snowstorm hit, making it really hard to get around. Against their leader Yuri's advice, they decided to cut straight through the San Juan Mountains, even though they were warned not to. As they crossed the rough mountains, it became clear one guy just couldn't keep up with the group. So, they made the harsh decision to leave him behind to die. He knew he was being abandoned. He watched his 5 friends disappear into the snow, but strangely, he didn't die. Instead, he spent the next 2 months wandering through the snowy forests with no idea where he was going, eating roots and flowers, and looking for shelter whenever he could. But what really saved him was the coffee pot holding the burning embers inside, which let him start fires at night to keep warm. One time he was so hungry that he cooked and ate his leather shoe. He was close to dying when he accidentally found the front outpost and went inside that hut. After the man finished his story, the officials were shocked and silent for a while. Then they asked him if any other men had come through there. if anyone else survived. He answered, "No, you're the only one. We haven't seen anyone else." The officials didn't send out a search team right away because the chances of his comrades surviving 2 months in the wilderness were very slim. And even if they were alive, they had an idea about where to start the search. They needed Al-Farid to lead them, but he wasn't well enough to take on another adventure. So, Al-Farid stayed at the front base for weeks, recovering. When he finally got better, he led a team to look for the missing men, but unfortunately, they didn't find any sign of them. The mystery of what happened to those men wasn't solved until that summer, after the snow finally melted. In August 1874, there was a traveling artist named John Randolph wandering through a forest west of Colorado, near the area the prospectors were supposed to pass through as they tried to leave the valley. As John walked, he started to notice a smell. There was a strong, nasty smell, so he followed it until he reached an empty area where he saw what looked like an old, run-down campsite. Curious, he got closer to see who was there, but froze in place when he saw what was lying on the ground in the middle of the site. There were 5 dead bodies lined up neatly in a row. These bodies were the source of the foul smell. Despite his shock, John immediately realized that these men hadn't died naturally. One of them was completely decapitated, and the other 4 showed signs of repeated violent blows to their heads. But that wasn't all. John also noticed that the bodies were at very different stages of decomposition. 2 of them were almost just skeletons. The other 3 were almost intact, but with open, torn chests. It looked like one of them had died recently, so much so that he seemed to be just sleeping, despite the deep wound in his chest and head that confirmed he was dead. John wanted to turn around and walk away, but he felt a sick curiosity. He wanted to know exactly what he was looking at. He wanted to understand what had happened to these men. So, even though he knew it was better to stay away, he moved a little closer to the bodies. And when he got close enough, he noticed something else that was completely strange about the scene as he looked at these men. He noticed that the wounds they had, especially around the chest area, looked surgical. Whoever hurt them, probably those bandits, did it with incredible precision. These weren't just random stabs that killed these men. It was more like the cuts of a butcher slicing meat. Then John looked up from the 5 bodies and saw, not far away, the remains of a burnt-out fire pit. There was a path leading into the woods behind the fire. Again, John wanted to run, but his curiosity got the better of him. He walked past the bodies, went over to the fire pit, and followed the path into the forest, where he found a run-down shelter hidden among the trees. The place was abandoned, no one was there, but it showed all the signs that someone had been living there for a long time. Then suddenly, everything clicked into place. John realized what he'd just come across. Obviously, these 5 men had been killed, and the person who did it probably lived in this camp. For weeks or maybe months, this person had been cutting up these men, cooking parts of their bodies over that fire, and eating them. John thought about it, terrified by this realization. Was this guy who lived here going to come back? Would he come back soon? He didn't know. So, in a panic, he pulled out a sketchbook and started drawing. The guy then turned around and ran as fast as he could to find help. It turned out that John, the painter, was totally right about what he thought was happening at that camp. After Alfred was left to die, the other 5 men kept walking through the night toward the mountains. Then someone attacked them, started killing and eating them, and that someone was Alfred himself. Shocking, right? I agree, but that's the harsh truth. That's why Alfred survived all that time. Not just because he could start fires at night and eat plants, but because he could start fires and eat his own friends. No one has ever figured out exactly how Alfred killed those 5 men, or how long he killed them. All we know is based on the investigation. It seemed that 4 of his victims were asleep when they were killed. But the 5th victim, who was actually Israeli, the only man who loved and cared for Alfred like a father, was the only one who showed strong signs of resistance before being killed. Although Alfred denied killing all 5 men, claiming he only killed one of them in self-defense, and that someone else killed the other 4, which is a vague claim, there was one thing he never denied: eating human flesh. In fact, he frankly admitted to the authorities that he liked the taste of human meat. When they searched the campsite John Randolph found, they discovered the remains of a dead deer nearby. But Alfred, even though it was easy to get to, never tried to cut it up and eat it. Instead, he kept eating human flesh from his supplies. In the end, Alfred was convicted of murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. But in 1901, when he was 92, he got paroled and immediately became a vegetarian before passing away a few years later. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to support us by liking and sharing the video with anyone who loves this kind of content. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories.